Hi, I'm Bill Bradley. Join me for a recent excerpt of American Voices. There's always been something uniquely American about baseball. Indeed, the sport was invented here. However, there's a part of baseball history that's not as well known. Something that we as a country are not proud of. For decades, African Americans were not allowed to play in the major leagues with white players, and so they formed their own league. It was called the Negro Baseball League. Bob Kendrick is the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. That's Kansas City, Missouri. Bob also hosts a show right here on Sirius XM called Black Diamonds. Bob Kendrick's here with me now. Bob, great to have you on American Voices.
Oh, Senator, it is my honor. It is a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
So, for many people who might not know, can you tell us about the league and why it had to be formed?
Well, you touched on it beautifully in your introduction because these leagues were created because of American segregation. And baseball was also separate. And so these courageous Black and brown players needed a forum to showcase their world-class baseball abilities. Now, Black folks have been playing baseball for quite some time. There's some evidence of us playing even as enslaved people, but it was through barnstorming. And it really did not have an organized body until 1920, when Andrew Rube Foster, the genius, would lead a contingent of 8 independent Black baseball team owners into a meeting held here in Kansas City at the Paseo YMCA, right around the corner from where the museum currently operates.
Wow.
And, Senator, out of that meeting came the birth of the Negro National League, the first successful organized Black baseball league, and then the Negro Leagues would operate for the next 40 years from 1920 until 1960, and it gave a platform for some of the greatest athletes to ever put on a baseball uniform.
Give us some of those names.
Oh.
Josh Gibson.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Josh Gibson, who, of course, spent many years there in D.C. playing for the Homestead Grays. Now, the Homestead Grays originated just outside of Pittsburgh, but later moved to our nation's capital, and Senator Homestead Grays were outdrawing the Washington Senators. And Josh Gibson was a mainstay on many teams, but particularly the Grays, because he's plucked out of the stands when he was 17, 18 years old to take the place of the Grays catcher who had gotten hurt. Well, needless to say, the Grays catcher never got his job back. And so, but you know what? There's no shame if you lost your job to Josh Gibson, because Josh Gibson combined the power of Babe Ruth and the hitting ability of Ted Williams into one dynamic package, because lost in his tremendous power, and he was powerful. I mean, they don't even look at areas in the ballpark where he hit home runs. They look at landmarks where he hit home runs. They'll say, you see that tree over there? Josh hit one over there. You see that warehouse over there? Josh hit one over there. But he wasn't just a great power hitter. He was a great hitter. Lifetime batting average of .354. And in head-to-head competition against major leaguers in countless exhibition games, hit over .420.
You say in exhibition games with major leaguers. What?
Yes, sir.
What were they?
They played countless exhibition games against white major league teams. And that's why there was never any doubt. Yes, sir. And the history book bears out that the Negro League teams, or the Black All-Star teams, won the majority of those games, almost 75% of those head-to-head matchups. And so really there was no doubt about their ability to play in the major leagues. It was just simply the social conditions of our time and fear that kept them out of the major leagues. And I always preface fear, because I don't think the superstar major leaguer was really concerned about integration. It was the average major leaguer that was concerned about integration. Because as you well know, if you allow this influx of great Black and brown talent in, I might lose my job. And these were great jobs. There were only 16 teams in the major leagues. So this was about self-preservation. I can understand it. It is human nature to try and
Mm-hmm.
protect what is yours. But as a great athlete, and you know this as well, great athletes appreciate other great athletes. And the only way you can measure how good you are is by playing with and against the very best. And so there were many major leaguers. Ted Williams comes to mind, who, upon his own induction into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 1966, he stood there and boldly proclaimed that he hoped someday the likes of Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige would be voted into the Hall of Fame as symbols of those great black stars who weren't there because they'd never been given an opportunity.
I remember seeing Satchel Paige when I was a kid outside St. Louis. He played for the St. Louis Browns.
That's right. That's
At
right.
the end of his career, he was like 50 years old.
Yeah, and that's what we think, because we don't really know.
Because nobody had that birth certificate.
We don't really know how old Satchel was.
He's got one of the best all-time lines, never look back, because somebody might be gaining on you.
Somebody might be gaining on you. And he was amazing. Even those years when he was with the St. Louis Browns, when he's well past his prime, he makes 2 all-star teams. I mean, he was incredible. Satchel, I tell my guests all the time, Senator, there will never, ever, ever be another Leroy Satchel Paige. Not someone who combines the longevity. By his estimation, he pitched in over 2,600 games. The great stuff. Recorded some 55 no-hitters and only God knows how many strikeouts, and the charisma. He could sell it. Yeah, he could sell it, but he could back it up.
He sold it to a little white kid in Missouri, me.
Everybody wanted to see the old man pitch. He would ride into towns, and the towns would shut down to watch him do his thing. I mean, he was absolutely, he was the Muhammad Ali of baseball before we ever knew who Muhammad Ali was.
Right. So the Negro League, produced these incredible stars, and yet, it was a segregated world at the time, right? So what was it like for baseball players in the Negro League?
It was tough. It was tough. The baseball field was their sanctuary. The challenges for them, Senator, came as they were traveling the highways and byways of this country. It wasn't uncommon that they could ride into a town, fill up the ballpark, and yet not be able to get a meal from the same fans who had just cheered them, or not have a place to stay. So they would sleep on the bus and eat their peanut butter and crackers until they could get to a town that would offer them basic services. But as I tell my guests here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, what you have to admire is that they never allowed that set of social circumstances to kill their love of the game. So their spirit was like, okay, well, if I've got to sleep on the bus and if I've got to eat my peanut butter and crackers, then so be it. I'm going to keep playing ball. And really, that's the prevailing spirit that our guests feel when they walk into the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. There's nothing sad or somber about this story. Now, we know the circumstances that dictated a need for a Negro Leagues. Segregation is a shameful period in this country's history. But the story of the Negro Leagues is embodied with the American spirit. Yeah, it is everything that America prides herself in being. And so this is a triumphant story, and that's how we treat it. It is a celebration. It is the celebration of the power of the human spirit to persevere and prevail.
You mentioned that the teams would come into towns and fill the stadium and not even be able to get a place to lay their heads at night. So that must mean that whites came to watch the Negro League, right?
Oh, in big numbers. And a lot of times they were playing in these white-only towns, or basically majority white towns. And then even when they were playing, because keep in mind, Senator, they were playing in a lot of the same major league stadiums, because the one thing that the Negro Leagues had, and I tell people the fundamental difference between the Negro Leagues and Major League Baseball was money. Major League Baseball was better funded. So those Major League owners had their own stadiums. And so the Negro Leagues were oftentimes renting the ballpark from those major league teams. But then when you stop and think about it, that was also one of the reasons that it took Major League Baseball so long to integrate, because you had
Oh,
major
yeah,
league
the
teams
source of
that
revenue.
exactly, exactly. And so there were a number of white fans who were coming in to watch these Negro League games, and even more so during World War II. While a lot of young Negro League stars went over to serve, just like Major League stars did, the superstars of the Negro Leagues, the Satchel Pages, the Josh Gibsons, the Cool Papa Bells, they were still here. They were too old to go to service. And so white fans were filling up these ballparks to watch these guys play. And that is what really started.
So how did they relate to the players?
They loved them because they were seeing what many believed to be the best baseball being played in this country. Without question, the most entertaining brand of baseball that was being played in this country.
What does
And
that
that's why
mean?
you saw that ground, because they played the game where you played with Clyde Frazier and you played with Earl the Pearl Monroe. You know,
Sure.
the kids would say they had swagger. Well, the Negro Leagues had that at too. That was way back when. They played the game with a flair because they understood that this was entertainment. So when you went to a Negro Leagues game, you were going to see great fundamentally sound baseball, but you were going to be thoroughly entertained. So for instance, if a guy dove in the hole and flipped it behind his back to start the double play, back then the major leaguers would accuse them of showboating. Well, today you see that, it's common now. You see that, that's a top 10 highlight on everybody's sports show. But as my friend, the late, great John Buck O'Neill would say, number one, if you got something to show, show it. Number two, is only showboating when you can't do it. And so,
yeah. The point is the ball gets from one place to another. It doesn't matter how.
It doesn't matter how.
The same thing when people start to throw behind the back passes in basketball.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let me ask you this. So here was the Negro League. It was a place for great players. How did the African American community feel when Jackie Robinson joined the majors? You look back and hear the whole story,
yes,
but it must have been an incredible thing for African Americans.
It's really interesting, Senator, because this to me is why this story of the Negro Leagues is so layered. Because you're right. For African Americans in this country, Jackie Robinson's breaking of the color barrier, I like to say, was equivalent to the euphoria that we saw when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. I mean, this was pure jubilation because this is something that we had been waiting for. We wanted so desperately to see how our great Black stars would fare once they had the opportunity to compete against what the world had said was the best. Now, I don't ever think the Negro League players ever believed that the major leaguers were better, but everybody else did. And so for African-American fans, they had been waiting on this forever. But what we did not understand was that Jackie's breaking of the color barrier was going to kill the Negro Leagues.
Huh.
And with it,
interesting.
And with it, the decline of so many African-American communities in this country. Because, Senator, wherever you had successful Black baseball, you typically had thriving Black economies. And the Negro Leagues had been this catalyst that sparked economic development in so many communities. We talked about riding into a town and not having a place to stay. Well, what happens? Black-owned businesses started to emerge to meet those needs. Negro Leagues Baseball brought them a built-in clientele that led those Black-owned businesses to their economic heights. So when Jackie breaks the color barrier, that Black fan base that had been so loyal to the Negro Leagues, they transition now over to the major leagues. And really, there was not enough disposable income to support two leagues, and now the Negro League stars are being plucked away to go into the major league.
Right.
Yeah. And so it spelled the end of the Negro Leagues.
People don't think of that.
No, I tell my guests all the time, there is always a cost for progress. Always. And today is more technological in nature because with each technological advancement, somebody loses their job. But this was good for the soul of our country. It moved us in ways socially that we never ever dreamt possible, but it did come at a cost. And Black businesses paid a dear cost for what was deemed
Hmm.
progress.
You know, we were talking about Jackie Robinson. Tell me about a journalist named Lester Rodney.
Oh, yes.
What role did he have? I mean, you know, until I started thinking about this interview, I didn't know who Lester Rodney was.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't. And he's another one of those fascinating stories that seems almost too good to be true. But I tell people all the time, son, you can't make this stuff up. It's too good. It's too good. In this case, the truth is absolutely better than fiction. And Lester Rodney was a white communist journalist who wrote for the communist newspaper, The Daily Worker, who may be as impactful and as influential in helping usher in integration as anyone. He wrote consistently and constantly about the great stars of the Negro Leagues, and then started to question out loud why they weren't in the major leagues when they were as good or better than half of the guys playing in the major leagues. Now what happens? White fans start to pick up the same charge, and they were putting a lot of pressure on Major League Baseball to re-examine its hiring practices and allow these great Black and Hispanic players into the major leagues. And Lester Rodney, along with other Black journalists, were very instrumental in trying to arrange tryouts for these players. And so, yeah, he is greatly influential in helping usher in integration in our sport.
Well, so for those people who don't know the story, tell us how Jackie Robinson finally signed in the majors with the Dodgers.
Yeah, it's such an interesting story because, you know, you'll hear people say Jackie Robinson was signed away from the Kansas City Monarchs. No, he wasn't. He was taken away from the Kansas City Monarchs. And it's really such an interesting story because Branch Rickey initially, Senator, wanted Monty Irvin. Monty Irvin was the owner's choice. If anyone was going to break the color barrier, they wanted it to be the great Monty Irvin. Monty Irvin was a superstar in the Negro Leagues. I mean, he had everything. Five-tool guy, five-tool player, you know, movie star,
Right.
good looks. He had everything you needed to be a star. And he was a much better baseball player than Jackie Robinson, and that's not taking anything away from Jackie Robinson because, as you well know, he is one of the greatest athletes in American sports history. But that's who Branch Rickey initially tried to sign in 1944. And the Monty was playing for the Newark Eagles, and the owner was a woman by the name of Effa Manley. And Effa Manley fought Rickey off. She fought him off because Rickey was going to come take Monty Irvin without compensation. That was really his master plan. Branch Rickey was going to come into the Negro Leagues and essentially raided of his star talent without any compensation to the other Negro League owners because he didn't think that they would be able to contest legally and block him from doing it. But Effa Manley was prepared to litigate, and he backs off of Monty Irvin. Now, Monty was disappointed, naturally, and he backs off of Monty Irvin. That's when he sets his sight here on Kansas City and Jackie Robinson, who was playing here for the great Kansas City Monarchs in 1945. Well, the Monarchs owner couldn't fight Rickey off. You know why?
No.
Because he was white. The Monarchs owner was a guy by the name of James Leslie Wilkinson, or we called him Wilkie. Wilkie was the only white owner of the original 8 Negro League franchises when the Negro Leagues were formed in 1920. He owned the great Kansas City Monarchs. Well, Wilkie made his entire living in Black baseball. And so here's the situation. If this white man who had made his entire living in Black baseball, if he's the guy that stands up and publicly blocks this Black man from playing in the major leagues, he's damned if he did, and he's damned if he didn't. Or as we like to say, he's stuck between that proverbial rock and hard place because that Black fan base that had been so loyal to him, they would have turned their backs on him right away. And so publicly, Wilkie said all the right things. Privately, he was seething, but he wasn't seething because a Black man was going to play in the major leagues. But this Black man that you about to take away from me, You're going to put me out of business. He sold his team the very next year after Robinson breaks the color barrier in 47. Wilkie sold his team to his business partner, T.Y. Baird, because he knew it wasn't a matter of if, it was simply a matter of when the Negro Leagues were going to go out of business.
Right. That's a fascinating story. You know, you usually hear the story of Branch Rickey as the great man who integrated baseball. And you don't understand this underlying dynamic that you just described. That's really interesting, Bob, really.
Yeah, and he absolutely was a righteous man, but he had some ulterior motives going when he made this move. You know, but it was still a very bold move to try and bring a black man into the major leagues, you know, because the other owners were completely against it.
So tell me about the Negro League Museum. Let's say I walk into the Negro League Museum. What do I see?
You walk into an old ballpark.
Really?
And the first thing that you see in this old ballpark is what we call the Field of Legends. And Senator, I'm obviously biased, but I think it is one of the most amazing displays in any museum anywhere in the world because it features 10 life-size bronze sculptures of Negro League greats. And they are cast in position as if they were playing a game. And each of the athletes represent 10 of the first group of Negro Leaguers to be inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And so you walk in, you peer through a chicken wire backstop. And even the chicken wire is symbolic because it is symbolic of American segregation. During that era, if black fans were allowed in to watch a major league game, that's how we were separated. So black fans would typically sit down the left or right field lines. We'd be separated from white fans in the rest of the ballpark with a chicken wire barrier. So you can see this incredible display, but you can't get to it. We purposely segregate our visitors from the field. You have to earn that right.
So they can feel as a African-American would feel going to a park.
Absolutely. And so you're almost deemed worthy. You know, after you've kind of bared witness to everything that they had to endure to play baseball in this country, the very last thing that happens here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum is now you can take the field. And there's this overwhelming feeling of belonging. You know, I've seen our guests, many of them move to tears when they walk out on that field. And the statues are so amazingly lifelike. And you look into their eyes. I have no doubt that when things settle here in the evening, everybody going home, they throwing that baseball around the horn. There's no doubt about that.
I don't know. Let's put a camera there, Bob, and check it out.
And finally, our sixth member of the Hall of Fame class of 2022 played, managed, coached, scouted for nearly 8 decades before becoming one of the game's great ambassadors. He played professionally from 1937 to 1955, with newspaper reports proclaiming the 3-time All-Star among the finest fielding and hitting first basemen in the Negro League. He stepped away from Kansas City Monarchs to serve his country in the Navy before returning and eventually becoming a player, manager, executive, and scout.
So, after visiting the museum, what do you want people to take away from it?
For me, I want them to walk away understanding just how impactful this story was, not only in helping change the game of baseball, but ultimately helping change our country for the better. That's what makes this story so special. These athletes, Senator, never cried about the social injustice. They went out and did something about it. You won't let me play with you in the major leagues? Okay, I'll create my own. But when you stop to think about this, and you alluded to this in your opening, when you stop to think about this, that is the American way. And so while it was America that was trying to prevent them from sharing in the joys of her so-called national pastime, it was the American spirit that allowed them to persevere and prevail. And so I think my guests come here expecting to meet some pretty good baseball players. And of course, you're going to leave not being disappointed. You're going to meet some of the greatest athletes to ever play this game. But by the time you walk away from this experience, you walk away with a much deeper, richer appreciation for just how great this country really is. And to me, that's what this story is all about.
Yeah, here, I'd say that. There's more of my conversation with Bob Kendrick.
While my childhood idol is circling the bases there, I'm circling the bases in my mother's living room.
That's coming up next. Stay with us.
Did you see Jackie Robinson hit that ball? It went zooming across the left field wall. Yeah, boy.
Yes, Jackie hit that ball.
And when he swung his bat, the crowd went wild because he knocked that ball a solid mile. Yeah, boy.
Yes, Jackie hit that ball.
I'm Bill Bradley, host of American Voices. We're back now with my guest, Bob Kendrick, president of the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City.
It is, I think, one of the most important cultural institutions in the world.
So, Bob, you went to school on a basketball scholarship, but here we're
Of all
talking about
things.
baseball.
Exactly.
As a kid, did you love baseball?
I did. I've been a baseball fan since I was probably 5 years old. I taught myself how to read a box score out of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. My father was a big baseball fan. I'm the youngest of 6 boys. They were all baseball fans. So I've been around baseball all my life, even though in my little town, it was just too small to field a baseball team. We played sandlot baseball like everybody, or you played whatever sport was in season in a sandlot capacity. But my high school only had basketball and track. And anyone who knows me knows that I don't believe in running if there ain't a ball involved. Just running for the sake of running. We don't want to do that. And so I played basketball, and I was fortunate enough to get a small college basketball scholarship that got me to Missouri, Parkville, Missouri. And so I played a couple of years of NAIA basketball out here, and that's how I got to Kansas City. And then I just stumbled into the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and began as a volunteer with this organization.
Give us a little picture of you, this young kid in Crawfordsville, as you say?
Crawfordsville,
Georgia. When you're there in the room, you're turning on the radio, you're listening to the game, what happens to your imagination, you know? How do you think?
Everything. And we could, we were close enough to Atlanta where I remember the old TV that we had, and we had an antenna that was on the outside of the house. And so depending on what the weather was like, you go out and you turn the antenna, and it may help the signal come in a little bit better. And so that's kind of how we got to see. So the game that Mr. Aaron breaks Bruce's record was on network TV. So I was actually able to see that game. And I got to tell him this story. Now, I'm almost 12 years old in 74 when he breaks Bruce's record. And when he hits home run 715 in Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, I'm 80 miles away in Crawfordville, Georgia.
And here is Henry Aaron. This crowd is up all around. The pitch to him, bounced it up there, and it's ball one.
And while my childhood idol is circling the bases there, I'm circling the bases in my mother's living room.
Henry Aaron in the second inning walked and scored. He's sitting on 7-14. Here's the pitch by Downing.
Her old couch was first base. She had an old TV that was second base, another old couch that was third base, and her recliner was home plate. And as my childhood idol was touching them all, I was touching them all too.
The fireworks are going. Henry Aaron is coming around third. His teammates are at home plate. And listen to this crowd.
And I think you're right, though. That's the beauty of baseball. It's the most romanticized sport of them all. And that's why it is still one that people listen to on the radio. I know people who will watch the game on TV, but still turn the radio on because it allows you to use your imagination. You can put yourself in those situations. And just like it was in basketball, I kind of had ever since in basketball, I never missed a game-winning shot when I was on the, when I'm out in the yard by myself. How you had your countdown, 3, 2, 1. I made that shot every time or I got fouled.
It's amazing, isn't it? You never miss. It's like a highlight film of some great player. You see them, they never missed in highlight film.
It is an honor to meet you. I am a big fan because as a kid, I was a big New York Knicks fan.
Oh, you were?
I grew up in Georgia. Yeah, no, you, Willis Reed, that whole group. So
and Clyde.
Yeah,
Earl.
Clyde. Well, Clyde, I wanted to dress like Clyde. Who didn't?
We all did. Dick Barnett wasn't a bad dresser either.
No. So those Knicks teams were some of my favorites as a kid growing up.
Barnett took me to his tailor. I wore blue jeans and an army jacket in those years. And so he took me to his tailor and dressed me in an Edwardian suit.
That is outstanding.
So listen, Bob, thanks so much for being here on American Voices and for teaching us about such an important part of our history.
Well, I want to thank you. I can't wait. I hope that your travels will bring you to Kansas City so that we can show you this place. It is, I think, one of the most important cultural institutions in the world for the work that we're doing to save a piece of baseball and Americana that was literally on the verge of extinction. This story, Senator, was going to die when that last Negro Leaguer left the face of this earth. We cannot allow that to happen. And it's such an inspirational place. We need it for its educational value, but its inspirational value may be even more important. And I look forward to the day that you come out to Kansas City to see us.
I'll be out there, Bob, but you forgot the secret weapon of the museum. You. Okay. I've been speaking with Bob Kendrick. He's the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri. To find out more, visit our Facebook page. It's American Voices with Senator Bill Bradley. Thank you for listening to American Voices here on my YouTube channel. For more interviews celebrating the goodness and creativity of the American people, click the subscribe button below.